Go and do likewise. The Parables and Wisdom of Jesus by John Hendricks. Read to you today by Gammy. Jesus' sandals were always dusty. Jesus didn't call any place home. But he was not alone. Alongside Jesus were his students, his 12 disciples. These men were not rich or powerful. They were ordinary people. There was Peter and Andrew, and James and John the fishermen. There was Philip, Thomas, Thaddeus, Bartholomew, James, Simon, and Judas. One of the disciples, Matthew, had even been a tax collector. Jesus had called each one to follow him from the very beginning of his journey. Jesus and his disciples walked from town to town among the people of Galilee and Judea and Israel because he was on a mission. He was God's son, sent to be a teacher, storyteller, a miracle worker, and a savior. But no one, not even his disciples, knew where Jesus was headed. When he spoke to the crowds, he invited them all to listen. Jesus' teachings were full of vibrant images, often radically different than what the people had heard before the Jewish leaders. When he showed up in a town, everyone wondered what Jesus would say that day. Jesus was quite unusual. He spoke with the authority of a wise and important rabbi. But Jesus spent most of his life in the streets and not in a temple. He touched lepers and they were healed. He blessed the brokenhearted and had dinner with outcasts. The existing temple authorities and teachers of the law didn't see Jesus as a proper rabbi. At first, they were eager to discredit his teachings and expose him as a fraud. But as Jesus performed miracles of healing right in front of their own eyes and even forgave sins, eventually their annoyances turned to hatred and fear. Who would listen to them if the people followed Jesus? But Jesus was going somewhere. His journey to find those most in need of him began anew each morning. Jesus walked, and ever since, people have followed him. Jesus rested upon a shady rock. As the crowd of townsfolk grew quiet, a skeptical rabbi, an expert in Jewish law, questioned Jesus. "Teacher, what should I do to live an eternal life with God?" Jesus turned the question back on the rabbi. "Well, what do the scriptures tell you?" "Teacher, the law tells us to love the Lord with all our being and to love our neighbor as naturally as we love ourselves." Jesus said, "Yes, obey this, and you will live forever with God." Hoping to demonstrate the mastery of the law, the rabbi said, "But can you tell us who exactly is our neighbor?" Then Jesus told a story.
Once there was a man, and he was on that dangerous journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. You know how narrow and perilous this way is to travelers?
It was growing dark, and on a remote stretch of the rocky path, the man was attacked. Thieves who prey on isolated travelers fell upon him. They beat him, stole all of his possessions, even took the clothes off his back, and they left him to die. But a priest of God, the ones you see in the temple, was also traveling this lonely road. As he looked upon the dying man, the priest feared for his own life, or perhaps didn't want to get his fine clothes dirty, and he passed him by on the other side of the road without even stopping to help. A short time later, a Levite, a person who also worked in the temple, came along the road. He, too, saw the wounded man, and blaming the man for his own carelessness, left him in a puddle of dirt and blood. A Samaritan soon after came along the dusty road. One of the very same Samaritans that you see is cursed, the same Samaritans that you despise, saw the injured man, a known enemy, and took pity on him. With a gentle hand, this Samaritan washed and bound the man's wounds. He lifted the man onto his donkey, guided him to a nearby inn, and cared for him for the rest of the night. In the morning, the Samaritan took 2 precious coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Care for this man and give him anything he needs. And when I return, I promise to pay whatever else he owes." Jesus paused. He looked around at the crowd and then at the doubting rabbi. "Now, I ask you, who was a neighbor to the man and who was a victim?" The teacher of the law reluctantly replied, "The Samaritan, the one who showed mercy." Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Jesus ascended to a high place, and the crowd followed. He spoke, teaching all who could hear. Blessed are those who feel like an empty jar. God will fill their emptiness with abundance. Blessed are those full of mercy, for they too will be shown grace. Blessed are those who cry, for the Lord sees every tear. Each one he will wipe away. Blessed are those who work for peace. They understand what it means to be God's child. Another day, Jesus walked slowly through a bustling crowd. He stopped and he spoke. There are many listening to me now. There are some who will hear what I say and obey, building their life upon my words. But there are some who will merely call me Lord, but live recklessly. Do you know what that is like? I will show you. There was a man, a wise and careful builder, who wanted to build a mighty house. He dug down deep, slowly and carefully. There he laid the foundation, stones on the sturdy bedrock. There was another man, also eager to make a great house. He built well, but did not dig deep, choosing to rest his house upon the sandy banks near the sea. Soon the rains came, and the winds blew cold. The oceans and rivers rose, and the roaring waters surrounded both houses. The tower built upon the firm bedrock stood tall, while the one built upon the sands crumbled and was swallowed by the sea. Everyone who hears but does not obey is like the foolish builder, who trusted the shifting sand instead of the steadfast stone. The people looked around in amazement, for they had never heard something so clear and sure. This man taught differently than the chief priests, who often relied on others' teachings when they preached. But Jesus spoke as one with a true authority. Again, Jesus spoke, teaching all who could hear. Do not judge carelessly your brother and sisters, because you too are just as guilty. You come to your brother and say, "Let me remove this sawdust caught in your eye." But all the while, there is a mighty branch on your own eye. How could you possibly see clearly enough to care for your brother if you don't first correct your own sight? Your heart will naturally tell you to love your friends and despise your enemies, but I will show you a new way. Love those who hate you. Pray for the ones who hurt you. Do good to the people who curse you. It is too easy to love only the lovable. Jesus had left the crowds to sit with his disciples by the fire. Brothers, God's kingdom, it will be extraordinary. Imagine a merchant walking through a bustling market. In a dark corner of the bazaar, he sees the most gorgeous pearl imaginable. He wishes to possess it, but he doesn't have enough to afford the great price. Still overjoyed, he rushes home and sells every scrap of what he owns in this world, every single thing of value to his name, in order to buy that single pearl. God's coming and already present kingdom will be so priceless, so beautiful, so limitless. There will be no cost too high for those who have truly seen it. Jesus spoke, teaching all who could hear. Can a hilltop fortress ever be hidden? Should a lamp be tucked under a veil? No, you will not be invisible light. Through me, you are now God's people, a people who will be known by light. Indeed, you are my high city. I want you to shine. Some crowdy, unwashed children tumbled around at the feet of Jesus as he gently moved through a crowd of townsfolk, scribes, and Pharisees. Reaching the edge of a great field, Jesus unfolded his cloak, sat down, and called a child over to sit with him. Then he told a story. A faithful shepherd is watching his flock of sheep. He has 100 sheep to care for and to protect. But one day, the shepherd looks around and after the count, discovers that one is missing. Leaving the 99 on the hills, he ventures deep into the wild, searching for the one that was lost. He searches for hours and finally finds his sheep stuck fast in a briar bush. The shepherd is filled with joy. Freeing the lost sheep and throwing her over his shoulders, he rushes back home, rejoicing all the way. In fact, he calls his family and friends together, crying out, "My lost sheep, I have found her. Celebrate with me." The tax collectors, the teachers of the law, the disciples, and the people looked around at one another. Lifting a child on his shoulders, Jesus said, "I tell you, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over a single lost soul that has been found than over the 99 in no need of rescue." And so it is the will of the Father that none of his children should ever be lost. The holy men that were listening began to grumble about Jesus. They hated how he spoke with the sinners and broke bread with the tax collectors. Now he was telling the sinners that God loved them. Jesus heard their muttering and told this story. Once there was a good father who had 2 sons, and he loved each of them equally. One day, the younger son came to his father and demanded his inheritance. Although it was insulting to be asked for such a thing, the father nevertheless gave his son his share of the estate. With riches in hand, the son left home and set off for an adventure in an exotic land. In a far-off country, the younger son squandered his father's wealth, pleasing only himself as he saw fit. Just as the son had spent the last of his fortune, a great famine came to the whole land. He was penniless, hungry, and alone, wandering the streets looking for work. The son managed to get a lowly job feeding pigs. Each day, as the wayward son showered out the feed, he ate to fill his empty belly with the dirt, husks, and pods the muddy swine were eating. That night, cold and hungry, he gazed back at the eastern horizon toward home. "Even my father's lowly hired men have food to spare every night, and I long to dine with pigs," the son lamented. In a flash, his folly became clear. "I will go home and return to my father," said the wayward son. "But I must tell him that I was wrong. I will say, 'I dishonored you, father. I no longer deserve to be your son. Treat me like one of your hired men, just so I may dwell in your house again.'" And he began his long journey home, alone, with remorse and sorrow. Weeks of travel passed, and the landscape became more familiar. As the wayward son came over the top of a hill that he had known since boyhood, he saw his father's house again. As the son prepared for his father's anger, he saw something startling. It was his father, running toward him. His father's warm embrace was upon him in a rush of joy. He grabbed his son tightly, lifting him off the ground and kissing his cheek. The son was overcome. He bowed his head and said, "Father, I have sinned against you. I am not worthy to be part of your family." The father interrupted him and called his servants. "Find the best robe, give him new sandals, and dress his hands with rings. Go fetch the very best meat and drink from our cellars and prepare a feast. Tonight we celebrate my boy, who was dead, but now is alive again." As the music and the dancing began, the smell of the food drifted toward the father's estate. The oldest son was alone, working hard in the fields. When he saw the commotion taking place at home, rushing back, he arrived at the party and discovered that his rebellious brother had returned and that his father was celebrating. The oldest son boiled with anger. He sat alone under an olive tree, refusing to join the party. His father saw him and came out to speak with him. The oldest son lashed out. "All these years I've done my duty, worked hard, and never disobeyed you. I've never had a party like this. That wayward son of yours squandered all his wealth, and this is how you reward him?" Kneeling beside his oldest son, the father said, "My boy, you are always with me, and everything I have has been yours. Today, we rejoice because the dead has come back to life. Your brother was lost, but today he is found." The sun dipped below the horizon, and Jesus gathered with his disciples. He sat and shook the dust from his sandals. His journey was coming to an end. "Where my Father dwells, there are many, many rooms. I am going ahead to prepare a place for you in that great house. You can't come with me yet, but you will know how to get there." His disciples Thomas said, "But Jesus, you can't leave us. We don't know the way." "Dear Thomas," Jesus replied, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but alongside me. If you know me, then you know the Father. And now, and for the rest of time, you do know the way, and you do know God. You have seen him face to face." The end. Take a second and read the author's note. We have so much more to learn. Be blessed.